I'm Evan Amato, and in this series, we explore how Dostoevsky's work and wisdom guides us towards a deeper understanding of ourselves, our society, and our search for meaning. I'm joined by my friend Elliot Honeycutt, and today we're going to be talking about Russian existentialism versus modern existentialism. The dichotomy we chose for this video is clarity versus confusion. But maybe to start out, let's talk about Russian existentialism, modern existentialism. How do they compare and contrast? How does that clarity and confusion play into all of that?
Sure. So, despite the fact that Dostoevsky specifically set out to help people navigate the difficulties of existence itself, to help them reach profound truths, it's not certain that he always would have thought of himself as an existentialist writer. That term became much more popular later on. So he was actually governed by his values and his beliefs, which are very similar to a lot of existentialist writers who came along later, in terms of the fact that he valued independence, that he believed that questions of faith were essential, that he believed that faith instilled values in humanity without which humanity would crumble and go into a direction of perversity. So Dostoevsky was an existentialist thinker, and he was a particular kind of existentialist thinker, and that is the Russian existentialist, much like Tolstoy's novels were. They were also of Russian existentialist literature, and the thing about this kind of literature is it takes a very clear-eyed perspective of Western society. Western Europe at the time of Dostoevsky was so confident in its own ideas after the Renaissance that they were almost overwhelmed by the optimism around science, and as a result, they didn't see the incredible void that was being left by the abandonment of religion.
Yeah. And I'm just going to pitch in right there. I really like kind of the path you're going down, because you're right. What you do have in Russian society at this time is a debate over how the extent to which we adopt Western ideals, philosophies. And so naturally, because there is that debate going on, they're asking, how much are we Slavic? How much are we Western? And they're able to talk about those ideas on a public level, or in the art of a writer. Exactly. And so they are able to see those ideas in a perhaps more clear-eyed fashion than the West was at the time, Western Europe. Yeah.
It shows the benefits of the distanced perspective.
Okay.
Even in modern research around business success, I'll find that people are more skilled and more capable of solving business problems when they think of the company as being someone else's, right? When you're tied up in all of the emotional connections that go along with identification with whatever it is you're trying to work through, if you are too identified emotionally with the problem that you're solving, then you aren't going to be nearly as efficient or as clear-eyed or perceptive as you're going about solving that problem, because all of your cognitive biases get in the way. But these Russian writers were able to see the Western problem from an outside perspective, and that's why their existentialism was so different and so refreshing. And like you said before, you hinted at the idea that there was no barrier between the educated person and the study of philosophy. Right now, we might think that in order to study philosophy, you need to go to school and get a philosophy degree, or you need to be you need to be a professor of philosophy to truly understand the philosophies that can make an impact on a person's life. But that partition was completely gone to the Russians, And
Because they didn't
everyone,
have departments of philosophy, is that correct?
exactly, there weren't these departments of philosophy. Everyone was a philosopher. Everyone who was trying to figure out how to live a meaningful life was engaging with the most profound kind of philosophy there is, and that is the philosophy of life. So rather than pursuing all of these subspecialties of philosophy, because that is the route that has been taken, or was taken, with logical positivism in England and in America. Their focus is rather on a broader philosophy that addresses the questions that are core to the human condition, and that comes from the outside perspective.
So, how might the Russian existentialism portrayed in Dostoevsky's novels relate at all to the modern existentialism that one might encounter, for example, going to college for the first time? What does that look like in our modern world?
Yeah, in that sense, so we can talk about how Dostoevsky's existentialism and how the philosophical quagmires and dilemmas that he addresses are mirrored in folks' lives. I I would think that there are probably quite a few people listening to this who had the same experience going to college that I had. And that was, I came from a family of faith, and my faith was something that permeated my entire existence. Everything had meaning on the level of my Christian faith. And then I went to college, and science in some ways became my God, because I began to think that everything could be predicted through laws of science, and that the way to arrive at a better life was by A, understanding these laws, and then B, controlling these laws to set up the perfect life for myself. But that fell apart. And the same dilemma.
And why did that fall apart?
Well, it fell apart essentially because as humans, we thrive when we're adapting. We thrive not when we're living in a world that's created to be perfectly aligned with our rational minds, but rather when we're living in a world that has change and flux and uncertainty. And it's that world that brings out the best in us. And so the idea that I could turn all the dials in my life to create perfection came crumbling down, because that perfection was never attainable. And also because everything became simply a chemical formula. Everything around me could be reduced to atoms and molecules, rather than something that had meaning beyond its simple physical form. And so I lost the capacity for transcendence. I lost the capacity for living for something bigger than myself. And when I started reading Dostoevsky, I was struck by that, by the fact that true transcendence and meaning can never be reached solely through the intellect, but it has to come from embracing the unknown, embracing our own smallness, and simply embracing a faith in something larger than yourself. And the thing is, although that seems like a rather simple or reductive idea, what we see with Dostoevsky is he is able, just like Einstein, to arrive at elegant conclusions, right? What's more elegant than Einstein's equation E equals mc squared, right? He's able to arrive at these elegant conclusions through incredibly rigorous chains of logic and understanding. And so these truths,
Yeah, I like that.
these truths aren't hollow.
Mm-hmm.
These truths are rich, and they have vitality, and they have potential for transforming our lives. And seeing how they're arrived at is part of that. So Dostoevsky was able to show me the dangers of that worldview that I had adopted, actually by creating a character with that same worldview. And that's the character of the underground man in Notes from the Underground. He believes that everything can be reduced to natural laws. And he believes that if he is slapped in the face, there's a great line about, or a great segment in the book about a slap in the face. And he effectively says the dilemma of a person who understands the full import of the laws of nature and physics is that if they're slapped in the face, they can neither forgive a person, because you can't forgive a law of nature, or get angry at a person, because you can't get angry at a law of nature. It's like yelling at a rainstorm. And so he becomes completely disconnected from his emotional world. And we see the same with Raskolnikov.
Yeah, Raskolnikov's name comes from, Raskol meaning schism, and Raskolit, the verb to split, and you see that separation of head and heart in Raskolnikov. A person who at times is deeply connected to their intuition, but then at other times allows themselves to be overridden by an ideology. And there's one part in the novel that I'm thinking of right now where Raskolnikov is remembering his murder of the old woman, and he says, "I didn't kill a person, I killed an idea." And it shows just how disconnected he is from that moment. So what would you say to conclude all this? What is Dostoevsky's solution for someone who is feeling in a existential crisis? What would Dostoevsky say to that?
Well, I think it's very helpful to look at the life of Raskolnikov as a sort of cautionary tale. And there's another character who I absolutely love, who, just as Raskol means schism, this character's name actually comes from the Russian word for reason. His name is Razumikin. And what's so great about Razumikin is, despite his name meaning reason, Razumikin is far from being constrained by reason. He has reason in the wide sense rather than the narrow sense of simply analytical understanding.
It's not disembodied.
He's not disembodied. And Raskolnikov is disembodied on clearly a physical level. When he commits the murder, he loses complete control over himself. He behaves as if he was in a hypnotic trance. Razumikin, yes, he's a bit clumsy, but he's not out of touch with reality, with practicality, and so that had a tremendous influence on me. I was a bit lost in abstract ideas, and when I encountered the character of Raskolnikov in Dostoevsky's writings, I realized the need for connection, both deeper connection to myself, a deeper self-understanding. I was living in a way an unexamined life. I was examining the philosophies of others, but not deeply examining myself and the way that I was navigating this world and the influence that I was having on others. And so I saw the need for connection on that level, but also the need for connection with others. When Raskolnikov commits the murder, one of the truly despairing effects that he undergoes is the fact that he's completely alienated from society. He can't even hug his mother and his sister when they come to visit him because he's so disconnected. And we see that it's actually better to live a life of connection with others, with our environment, and with, again, ideas that are bigger than ourselves, than to live a life devoted solely to philosophies and logic. Totally. It's logical to want more than logic in life.
Yeah, and to wrap all this up, going back to E=mc², the conclusion that you just came to, it's better to spend life with people, connected with people. sounds obvious. It sounds simplistic. I hope that
No.
doesn't offend you.
No.
In the same way that E equals MC squared sounds obvious. It sounds simplistic. But the thing is, there's so much more under the surface.
Exactly.
Under E equals MC squared is years of complex scientific mathematical equations. Just in the same way that this conclusion that Dostoevsky arrives at of, oh, it is better to, go through life with people, to be connected in a very personable way. It's not just a statement. There's so much work under it, and I think that's what we get in his work.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And it actually presents us with a challenge, because we see how Einstein was able to arrive at these profound truths without experiment. He was able to arrive at his general theory of relativity solely through thought experiments. In 1895, when he was 16, he imagined himself riding along a beam of light. And that propelled him in 1905 to come up with the special theory of relativity, to have what was known as this miracle year, where he also was able to show wave-particle duality. And so we see that his imagination truly propelled him. And yes, he had reason, he had the mathematical understanding to be able to derive those equations. But he also had this incredible creative capacity. I believe it was Einstein who said creativity is more important than genius. And he had this creative capacity to put himself in situations which would otherwise have been impossible, like riding on a beam of light. Dostoevsky does the exact same thing. He can imagine what life would be like had he lived under a different ideology, had he lived in a different environment, had he lived with different relationships with others, and he can show the effects that will have on the human life. So what Einstein, again, what he did with an understanding of the cosmos and the atom, Dostoevsky was able to do in terms of an understanding of ultimate reality and the human will and our human nature.